taking a look at this passage. It's dirty work. It's a great passage on emotional labor, how it's provided in society, and how people working in the emotional labor sector can actually keep themselves updated, keep providing better care, and all those stuff. So let's get started. Flashback to my first day in child psychiatry as a freshly qualified clinical arts therapist, my dream job. Spent hours planning my drama therapy session, and now I'm with 4 7-year-olds and 2 nurses. Hello, I say, but no one listens. Two boys seems to be having a screaming competition. The room fills with their piercing cries. A third boy rocks back and forth. Occasionally, he frowns while a girl talks non-stop about penguins, then kicks me. So the author clearly is a clinical art therapist, and he had a and she, so not he, sorry for that. She had planned a drama therapy session. No one seemed to be very intrigued about that, right? And just a general description about the ongoing situation. Even if I recognize symptoms and psychological processes, I feel overwhelmed. Masking my desire, I say, "Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm going to tell you a story," but the children ignore me until one of the nurses speak. Her soothing yet firm voice changes everything. "Hey, everybody, let's listen." Miraculously, the children calm down. Into the quiet, I offer direction. "Let me show you something." I mime, holding a precious object in my hands. I have a tiny bird. Everyone is watching, so I whisper. My bird is very shy, but wants to meet you. The children smile. An hour later, the session is over and I'm exhausted. My face is red and sweaty and tense. My reactions feel embarrassing and non professional. In the following months, I will be spat on, hit, screamed at, and triggered. Daily, I will remind myself this is my dream job. So, she gives quite a great detail of information and like experience about what the first session went like, right? So no one was listening to her, and she had to take the help of the nurses to calm the children down, and like the uh, tension and all the stresses she went throughout the session, and at the end she was feeling very flustered, and like she had to keep remind her she had to remind herself of the fact that this was her dream job to keep on doing stuff like this, right? In the Managed Hurt 1979, the sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild identified and defined this kind of workplace interaction as emotional labor, or the management of feeling to create a publicly observable facial and bodily display. Inspired by Irving Goffman's work on the different roles we play, Hochschild built her case by looking at jobs in the service industry or in care work that require people to control their feelings and exhibit emotional responses that meet the demands of their role. In a restaurant, a waitress must smile at angry customer, and all these examples. For Hochschild, emotional labor describes a monetary exchange for correctly shaped emotions. It involves the development of communication and stress management skills. Over 25 years of hospital work as a therapist, then supervising and training clinical teams, I've learned to present a calm demeanor. Alongside doctors, nurses, teams dealing with suicides, domestic violence, road accidents, insults, manipulation, distress, blood, and all this stuff, I've developed skills to comfort and conciliate. So the topic is being directly brought over in this paragraph, emotional labor. Yeah, so talks about various works that has been done on the field by Arlie Russell Hochschild and Irving Goffman. Then also talks about how emotional labor should be correctly recognized, compensated based on the emotions shown and built and stuff. Uh, Emotional labor is very like it's not much recognized in today's society, right? But it is a vital part that helps build skills like communication and stress management. So it is something that should be very paid attention to and be recognized in today's society. And let's move on. When they work well, hospitals should provide respite and relief, yet backstage this emotional work is messy and grim. It can be classified as dirty work, a concept developed by sociologists as political scientists such as John Toronto, for work that remains hidden, the underbelly of society. Emotional hospital work is upsetting in the etymological sense, for it overturns, capsizes the emotions. How do staff bridge this emotional gap? So talks about the darker part of the emotional work provided in hospitals and care institutions. Like nobody talks about this stuff, right? And like people are expected to work at a certain pace and certain standards without any kind of like the backlashes or the effects they may face themselves are not much taken care about, right? We don't think about that every day. So this is the kind of the dirty work that's being talked about. When I run hospital supervision groups on this topic, I often begin by explaining that although emotional labor and emotional regulation are never explicitly detailed in a hospital job, they are required implicitly. Sorry. A young doctor ought to be able to calmly announce the imminent death of a loved one to family without betraying that they are feeling overwhelmed. An accident, an emergency medical receptionist must settle an must settle an aggressively drunk woman even if they fail terrified. So examples are given how we are expected to be emotionally, like to handle emotional situations without facing them on ourselves, and not to seem disingenuine or ingenuine at the same time, right? We are expected to handle them but not be too harsh, hard or something like that. We need to empathize but in certain limits as well. And not we, the people who are working in these doing the so-called dirty work are expected. Yet, what are these emotions at work? Our present English word emotion took shape in the 16th century, but historically, emotions are related to ancient concepts of pathos and humor. Why are early modern passions, perturbations, and appetites? Today, an emotion is broadly understood to have three parts: a spontaneous subjective state of arousal, experienced as pleasant or unpleasant, an increase in bodily measures such as heart rate or adrenaline, and a communicative element, often non-verbal. So, emotion has three parts. Those are mentioned: a spontaneous part, a physical reaction, and a communicative element, which is often non-verbal. In the context of hospital work, this means that during emotional labor, staff are managing a subjectively experienced, unexperienced situation that influences both body and mind. Every single interaction is impalpably different. So this kind of talks about the history of emotions, how the word came to be, what actual emotion is, and how every emotion is unique to one another. People feel the same thing in different ways, and all the stuff are shown. Hochschild distinguishes two kinds of emotional labor: surface acting or adjusting visible expressions, the tone of voice while the inner feelings are not changed, and deep acting where we embody and adapt the emotional role required of us. In hospitals, such emotional labor enhances patient safety, care, diagnostic skill, and the efficiency of treatment. The Latin root of the word emotion is movere. The emotions move us. All emotional labor involves emotional regulation and defined by the psychologist James Gross, referring to attempts to influence emotion in ourselves or others. So, as you can see, there are two kinds of emotional labor: surface acting, quite like understandable, like you feel something but you do not let it show on the outside, and like as you can intuitively tell, it's something that's not like, this is not something which is very sustainable, right, in the long run. And deep acting where we embody and like learn how to like flow naturally into the emotional state that is required, right? We can empathize with certain people while not getting too attached. Like we can be hard when the time is required, not like being whatever is needed. That's the main thing about deep acting, right? The Latin root is mentioned mover. Emotion is something that moves us, and we can try to influence emotions in ourselves or others. While many sectors necessitate emotional labor, a hospital houses people's pain and suffering. Inside the six basic emotions, joy, anger, surprise, fear, sadness, and disgust, run rife through its corridors. So, this part is talking about a hospital, how emotion is something very attached to it, because there are like people working there and coming there because of their ailments. And at the heart is patient care. Care is a theoretical position described by the hospital philosopher Cynthia Fleury, is what makes an uncomfortable word inhabitable, the miscarriage tolerable, the cancer bearable. So, care is something very important in surviving tragedies, and so it is something that is very much needed, and thus makes emotional labors quite a like work or labor in demand. But if emotional labor is role playing and a caring role, what is happening to hospital employees off stage? How to staff discover how to help yet not try to save the world, to create boundaries but not build impenetrable walls, to assume a role yet be authentic. So this paragraph basically questions if caring is nothing but role play, how it is authentic, like, and how it is sustainable from in the long run. So a lot of questions are being brought about emotional labor. In a capitalist hospital crammed with overworked and underpaid staff, is it even legitimate to ask people to be kind professionally and always available to console? So very legit questions being brought up. During a lecture I gave in a French medical school, an experienced oncologist admitted holding themselves back. At the start of my career, I avoided bedside end of treatment and palliative care announcements, leaving it to senior colleagues. I was too scared. So the senior oncologist tells about how she was avoiding work that was very emotionally taxing of her, right? She was too scared to do those. Months passed, and then she said it was my turn. At first, the appointments went badly, but I gradually developed techniques. I realized people need time, so we began to sit on chairs around the bed. No staff members were ever left standing so that they could be on the same, uh, potentially leave the room while a patient learnt of their imminent death. The seated position put us on an equal standing and encouraged clear communication. Also, I allocated more time to these appointments. Thus, extra 10 minutes were changed everything. While the professor talked, her voice stumbled slightly. The announcements became deeply personal as we talked about mothers preparing memory boxes for their children. After a while, I began to receive letters from families explaining how these appointments had helped them steer through grief and death. So, the transition has been made clear, right? How the senior oncologist learned techniques to not be like not be very apprehensive and like not avoid this emotionally taxing work, right? She found techniques that helped people's guide through tragedies, grief, and death, and this was very important in like important in increasing the quality of care she provided to her patients. Intuitively, the oncologist had developed an informal end of treatment protocol, yet emotional responses cannot be formalized. So, the protocol she had developed on her own was very informal, and it is something very common, right? Because emotional responses are not bound by law or by like given scientific protocols. And therefore, part of her protocol she insisted was based on her own emotional communication and boundaries. Even for staff, one emotional response cannot fit all. So the volatile nature of emotional responses is being shown. Another time, a medical student explained to their class, last summer I was interning in a geriatric ward. When people died, I did not know how to speak or bear the smells. I copied care workers, their quiet pitch of voice, vocabulary, how they gently touch the corpse. During supervision groups on emotional labor, staff have confided how they coped with their first suicide, the first time someone threw up on them, and all the stuff. Nurse in pediatric intensive care told staff singing with their parents as children died, providing care of in the moments of silence after death. When at the right, Jane Mautappa explains only poetry and song can convey our grief. So, different techniques to cope and to go through emotional taxing labor is being shown. Like they are very different based on how people feel and people try to convey their emotions. So, very different ways are being shown here. And in the next paragraph, the author will is shows to be very amused by highly skilled and unacknowledged nature of the work, right? So I'm always struck by the highly skilled and unacknowledged nature of the work. A hospital is a shelter for the needy, linked to the word hospitable, meaning to be kind and cordial. Staff are continually adapting to the subjective experience of their parents, never knowing if a life-threatening diagnosis will make them laugh nervously, produce tears, or induce silence. So it's very like you have to be very apprehensive, and it's very emotionally taxing, as I've already mentioned, because you don't know what's going to happen and what will be the emotional response of both the patient and yourself. So you always need to be on an edge. So that's something very important while providing the same quality of care. Emotional labor is not a psychotherapeutic process but an informal kind of transference where a person redirects some of their feelings from one to another, and it's unavoidable. A parent who shouts Upon discovering their daughter has leukemia, is not angry at the staff but feeling very helpless and desperate. Responding appropriately requires reading the room. When pediatric nurses sang during an end of life moment, it was a suggestion, never an obligation. Over my years with patients, I have learned to keep quiet and listen. In an experienced emotional way, to pay attention is, as the poet Mary Oliver wrote in Owls and Other Fantasies, our endless and proper work. So you always need to be very pay attention to the what the patient needs, and may not very he or she may not very clearly convey it through their actions or what they say, right? Because they are feeling something which you don't or can't even understand or comprehend, right? So you need to pay attention to actually understand how they feel, or to even get close to understanding what they feel. And so that is something very important. Staff must also distinguish between empathy and identification. Even while remaining authentic, a hospital worker has to draw emotional boundaries. They cannot feel pain of each patient or accept any behavior dished out to them. Empathy is our ability to put our feet in patient's shoes but not wear them all day. Equally, hospital work obliges us to accept with great humility much of another suffering unknowable. In her book on trauma, axiomatic, Marie Tumarkin explores these limits, where to begin helping and where to stop. What can be grasped of another person's suffering has limits, he writes. So, the point I mentioned before, you need to be empathetic, you need to try to understand what the patient is going through, but you shouldn't get too attached with them, right? Because you need to keep your work at a certain level, you need to keep your morale at a certain level, you need to keep your entire being at a certain level, and while providing the care. So it is something very important to know how to keep your own boundaries, and suppressing negative emotions can obviously cause problems. An acknowledgement of boundaries protects the patient but also protects the staff. Thus, emotional labor is not just about communicating outwards, it entails staff processing their inner emotions. But how a nurse should a nurse hold back tears when a patient dies? Numerous studies show that emotional suppression affects cognition and all forms all those bad stuff like stress, dents in our ability to form actual authentic relationships. Pushing down a negative emotion, for example, has both immediate and delayed consequence for our cardiac systems. Yet the reality of hospital means that a nurse in her mid-20s working in a neonatal intensive care unit may never see a baby leave the hospital. The patients either move to a higher dependency unit or don't make it home at all. How do staff work with such human tragedy but also go home from the suffering? Put another way, how do we prevent the battle weariness from hardening to your life comfort? So, this paragraph shows the downsides of being too attached, right? Like you cannot get attached, and else it will start getting to you, and but like it's very easier said than done. It's easier said than done. And so, how to bear such tragedies and still be like put all your baggage to one side and like live your life when you are outside the institution or something else, like how to not let it get to you. For early career medical workers, the problem is particularly challenging. When I was younger, I would get incredibly stressed before each operation. A heart surgeon from Leon confides. So he had sleepless nights, terrified, and his hand would shake. A nurse manager relates how, despite years of clinical experience, when she began working in a pediatric ICU, she fainted every month. So, various examples given how like sufferance of the care workers, right? And as a whole, the state hospital works an underpaid, highly skilled population that is more likely to suffer mental and physical health. So the main problem here is that people are people working in the emotional labor sector are actually facing problems, and how and who cares for the carers, like how they get their support. So it's a very legit question being asked here. Backstage, hospital personnel develop methods to deal with their emotions. The objective is not to suppress but regulate their feelings. In supervised sessions, managers or psychologists hold group debriefings after road accidents or distressing deaths. It helps to narrate the traumatic event, while group support allows staff to understand and process challenging experiences. Formal sharing is also a symbolic sign of institutional respect. An anesthetic nurse tells me after debriefing held after a colleague's tragic death. The very fact that this session was organized and the management team came meant the institution acknowledged and something serious had happened. Without it, I would have felt dehumanized. So, as you can see, the personnel develop their own methods. Like you should not, like they don't suppress their emotions and they talk about what happens. Like formal sharing is one such example of where people share what had happened, and the fact that efforts were being made to acknowledge the gravity of the event that had happened meant a lot to the people, or the people who were in the emotional labor part, right? And like without any kind of acknowledgement, like they would have felt dehumanized and like their emotions rejected. So that was very important for them. Hospital staff rooms offer informal support of the kind that researchers such as Moira, I'm not going to pronounce that, sorry, identify as effective strategy for processing negative emotions. Heads nod, hands are squeezed, and humor is key. In 2019, an US study on medical humor showed that levity helps staff release tension while gallows humor diminishes horror and denies distress. If the philosopher John Paul Sartre described emotion as the transformation of the world, then the humor offers hospital staff catharsis, takes them from catastrophe to something light. Over time, I've come to know when it will be important to make or share a joke when someone is unbearable. For the while patient is experiencing once in a lifetime personal tragedy, staff need to be able to face this situation every day. So the author talks about humor and some kind of acknowledgement in the form of heads nod and squeezing of hands. So the main thing that's been pointed out here that patients face tragedy once in a lifetime, like that this kind of tragedies, like but the staff face this every day, and humor and all other stuff like this help form catharsis for them. That said, staff must nevertheless leave the hospital carrying or discarding the weight of their day, so they should not carry the baggage back home. Uh, Outside the institution, the day's drama must be forgotten. Sorry, at the disaster specialist Lucy Isthop writes, when the dust settles, when the dust settles, the hardest part of an emotionally demanding job is demobbing. You might think that the family life was perfect antidote to intense work stress. However, once in our own homes, among friends or family, jokes about blood suicide, anecdotes do not make any sense. Uh, so, so when like people in emotional labor are outside hospital, they should not have any baggage, right? And this is again not as easy as it's being said, right? So people can develop different coping mechanisms to help with them, like joining a choir, singing this her stress out. An auxiliary nurse working with extremely violent patients in closed psychiatric unit said, when I go home I take off my nursing uniform, and it is as though the clothes are a kind of costume which has taken the physical blow and insult. So using the uniform as a metaphor to give give away all those kind of baggage is something which is also a coping mechanism, right? Other medical workers are self-medicate in more than traditional ways. Some 10 to 15% of healthcare professionals misuse substances in their lifetime, with professionals working in emergency medicine, psychiatry, and high-stress specialties at high risk. A recent study showed that around 60% of French doctors suffer burnout. So substance use is common and burnouts, and so is burnout, right? So this is some kind of statistics about the adverse effects of this stress. And the author began working as a clinical arts therapist. She felt as if she was spending my days on an emotional battlefield. Easy early on, I was to use hostile term surface acting. I observed other staff, learned how to speak slowly, steadily, anchor myself to the ground. Much of emotional labor is to do with such non-verbal communication. Inside, I might have been quivering wreck, but in the face of a violent child, I appeared calm. I used a quiet words during a schizophrenic episode, crack joke with teenagers, and do it all the stuff, right? So, the author was also into surface acting, right? So she felt all the emotions. She did not but she did not let it get to her outside. She did not show those emotions outside, right? And like the difference in emotions and what she actually felt, and what she actually showed was very different, and this kind of messed her up, right? And through training and training experience and looking at how other people actually coped with it, she learned how to deep act, like actually place herself in the situation, not get too attached. I began, in other words, to deep act, and in the process the calm mask became my face. Critically, deep acting is not permanent. Confronted by complex situations or acute ones like pandemics, health workers are destabilized and return to surface acting. The trouble is that persistent surface acting is strongly linked to burnout. So, surface acting, as I mentioned, is not very sustainable in the long run and can lead to burnout. Because the gap between the felt and display measure is difficult to navigate, staff will often crack under the pressure of pretending to care. There are red lights, warning bells. A decade hardened geriatric care worker recently told me, I know I have to change job. Suddenly, I can cope with seeing the people die every week. Each time I want to cry. So, deep acting is also not very permanent, right? Because there can be unprecedented situations where the care workers are not used to are not very used to, right? And that can lead to surface acting, and that in turn can lead to burnout. So there are also signals, as mentioned, and yet not feeling anything is a non-starter. If I did not care at all, I couldn't do the work. Like, not feeling anything is not possible because you wouldn't be in this line of work in the first place. Her words echoed with many testimonials I heard from hospital personnel working across France and internationally. I've never met a member of staff who admitted to wanting to stop feeling emotions. It's not a problem for me because it means that I care. Between caring and remaining focused on patient welfare, hospitals professionals walk a tightrope. So there is a very thin line between actually caring and actually holding yourself back from getting attached too much. Right? They need to care, but not so much that they cannot sleep at night. Exactly what I'm talking about. Until very recently, emotional labor in hospitals was profoundly gendered and also hierarchical. It was traditionally seen to belong to the feminized province of nursing. So, yeah, so genders were assigned, and it was also not much recognized until very recently, right? Emotional skills have not been recognized, but expediency plays its role too in an increasingly technical profession with fast turnover. As one woman doctor recently told me, many doctors begin wanting to care and gradually lose the time, having to prioritize other things. All staff are torn by economic pressures and the demand to fit 10 physically dependent patients in an hour. The challenge is to provide quality of care, because the care, the held hand, the kind word is what makes unbearable experiences bearable and give meaning to the carer's work, right? So skills are not very recognized, and there are a lot of rush for the people, and they need to uphold their standards too. The emotions have not always been separated from rational medicine. The ancient Greek philosopher Gorgias argued that word had a psychotropic influence, allowing patients to overcome their fear. For medieval European physicians, the accidents of the soul influence health alongside air, food, drinks, and sleep. And the extraordinary Islamic Baimaristan asylum of the Sikhs, such as Al Mansuri Hospital in 13th century Cairo, provided models for Western hospital with their medical training and focus on care. So, both old and medieval examples of emotional labor support and care has been given. And it's also mentioned, like, surgical class at St. Thomas Hospital in London, 85, saying, with regard to operations and few acquisitions are necessary, it has been said that operator should have an eagle's eye, lion's heart, and a lady's hand. So there was recognition, and there is recognition coming slowly into the kind of work emotional labor people and medical work and care work has been giving, right? Today's neuroscience dispels the myth of a clear separation between reason and emotion. In the so-called hand model of the brain by Dan Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles, high stress situation caused the rational part to cede its management of the emotions. So today's neuroscience actually tells this, that high stress kind of messes up with the rational part of the brain and it shuts it off. Aggressive emotions can dominate and like guide actions and behavior very distinctly and very aggressively, right? And the same logic like same logic applies to both the patients as well as the overworked care workers as well. So it's not always easy to keep cool, keep calm, and like maintain the same quality of work. So this is something that neuroscience suggests, and this problem generated by emotional labor cannot be resolved by stress management techniques, meditation, or message chairs. In particular setting, emotional labor is intractable. We use the iceberg analogy. Care and emotional labor are hidden, invisible part of hospital, but at the same time there is foundation. Emotion is what makes the hospital care. So these are obviously not easy to fix, and like it's something that cannot be avoided, right? Because emotion is what makes the hospital care, as mentioned here, and with that comes all the baggage and all the emotional distress that the care workers face. Gunther B. Rees, author of Mending Bodies and Saving Souls, A History of Hospitals, calls for greater support for the notion of healing communities. He recognizes that the need for human contact and community is currently overshadowed by complex and impersonal diagnostic and therapeutic procedures. With artificial intelligence now entering hospitals, it's even clearer that we need to understand emotional labor as profoundly human work. It is the intangible act of giving us hope. A smile, listening ear can communicate care across the painful chasms of human suffering. So, the need for communities is being portrayed here, and we need to recognize emotional work as well. One solution to the problem is structural recognition of this hidden work, as being mentioned. We need to increase incentives like visibility, pay, work condition numbers that reduce the distress on certain sections of the people, right? Like we need to help the people and help their conditions. With antenna across France, Creative Commons involving staff, patients, academics, the project aims to make hospitals open places for reflection and experimentation by creating spaces where staff and patients can think through care. So this is one French example provided of how help is being provided to emotional laborers. Although I've worked in hospitals for more than 25 years, I often work through the doors by chance. I often think I work through the doors by chance. I never planned to have a medical career, but the passion, care, thoughtfulness of staff alike has been the one of the greatest gifts of my working life. They are it was a result of a clear developing a clear value system. I realized how much my hospital work can feel like a political act, almost the opposite of David Graeber's bullshit job. The bullshit job is meaningless, becoming psychologically destructive when paired with work ethic that associates work with self-worth, can resist capitalism. So, the author talks about her methods of resisting capitalism while not seeing care as a bullshit job, right? Like all other political acts like David Graeber. Hostad is correct in describing the exploitative aspects of emotional labor, but despite or perhaps of because of emotional labor, hospitals are nonetheless the most authentic places to work. They demand belief and integrity from their workers. Every day is different, every relationship requires something new. Deeply human and meaningful, this work changes lives. Such care should not be idealized or sentimentalized, but made visible, recognized, and allowing the dirty to be held up to the light. So, some of the reflections of some of the very valuable reflection of the author can be seen here, like the peers in this field as like gifts to them that kept her going, right? Emotional labor makes like the very nature of emotional labor being such a distressful job makes hospitals to be the most authentic places to work. Like you can directly see the effect of your work, and you are there because you want to, not because you need to, right? And do not she also provides she also claims and requests people not to idealize or sentimentalize with them, but to recognize the things they go through and not just turn a blind eye. So this was a very great passage on the dirty work of the emotional labors that people do, and she demands recognition like every field, and actual recognition should be provided to these care workers.